So on this Porsche 914, one of the things I'm going to need are windshield wipers. So they're non-functional right now, and I've already done a little bit of evaluation to see what the heck's going on. So let me show you what I've done so far. I pulled the wiper arms off. It's just like an acorn nut that sits on top of those stems. And I looked at the Haynes manual. To get to the linkage in the wiper motor, you've got to remove that fresh air blower under the cowl there. And to get that out, he didn't mention anything in the manual, service manual. I'm pretty sure this expansion tank is going to have to come off, which on this car, it's kind of unnecessary because all the fuel injection system has been stripped out of it. It's a carbureted car. I may or may not put it back in. So one of the things I was looking at I believe it's going to slide over the top of that fill neck. So there's some little tiny screws. I guess they're 3mm. They go in that collar right there. So I took a nut driver and got all those out, because I'm pretty sure this tank is going to slide out over the top of that fill neck. I'll know a little bit more in a second. I went ahead and cut this vapor line, which oddly just goes right back to the fill neck. So what that was for was when the fuel's too high and sloshing around, it goes into this tank, which eventually I guess it would flow into the main tank. I also noted that there's a little overflow orifice there, so when you get sloppy filling your fuel, that will go into the fuel tank, I would assume, unless there's some kind of drain line or something. There is a line there, so I'm not sure what that's all about. Anyway, let me get this overflow tank off and I'll show you what's underneath. So yeah, those little screws around the collar, and then there was another I guess that's a 6mm bolt that went into this tab over here, and then it just pops off. Now, as a note, that fill neck is molded into this overflow, so it's got to go back on, and there's a rubber gasket in between the overflow and the main tank. So now we can look back in here. Oh, also a great time to look in your tank and see how much rust you got in there. I was actually pretty surprised how this tank doesn't look that bad at all. Very surprising. So now I can actually see some of the wiper mechanism back in there. That particular stem doesn't look too rusty. Over here, a little bit worse. That could be the root of the problem, and high probability that the motor's toast. So next thing will be to get that cold air fan pulled out, and that should take me down to the wiper mechanism. So I started by taking those little clips off what appears to be a cover here, and there may be a filter or something inside of there. I thought maybe that would help out, but those little tabs started breaking off, and those clips, I probably dropped 3 of them down underneath the fuel tank. Hopefully I can fish them out with a magnet, but they're on the side here, those brackets. There was a 6mm bolt there and another on the other side. The one on the other side was too long and had a whole bunch of extra washers on it, so I know this has been out before. So somebody's been in here repairing this. Well, let me fish this thing out of here and we'll take another look. So I was able to get the cover out. I mean, it had some I don't know, glue or something along the top edge there, probably to help seal it. May have been leaking in the car, who knows. Just had to wiggle it out. There were no clips on the top of it, thank goodness. So it's got a screen that just slides out. Then I'm going to get in here and vacuum all this out. It looks like you can separate this casing from the fan itself. Gonna have to, because that's the only way to get that out without pulling the fuel tank, and I really don't want to do that. So let me clean all that up, get that casing out, and that actually probably will give me pretty good access to the wiper mechanism. May not even have to pull the motor out. Well, taking that little cover loose did not help. It still wasn't going to come out. And also, that's real troublesome because the screws that hold the cover to the fan assembly come up from underneath. It's 8mm heads. So I was struggling to get those things out. And now it will come out now. Now, there is some linkage underneath. I'm going to have to deal with that and make sure I don't screw all that up, because eventually I would like this fan to work. But yeah, I dropped the fuel tank. It's really not that hard, you know. It's all about draining the fuel out, which on this car, because I've consolidated the fuel lines, it's only got one fuel line that goes back to the carburetor. So that was real simple. And I also want to do some repoing on some wires here. That fuel pump wire, I don't like it coming through the bulkhead like that. I'll run it straight down to the pump. And so there was some stuff that needed to be addressed anyway. I got to get down here and clean all this stuff up down here. This is a major moisture trap in here. A lot of these 914s got serious rust problems down underneath the fuel tanks because it just traps everything, like tools and bolts and washers and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, still digging around in here. I will get this fan out, and then we'll see about the motor on the wipers, which is how all this started. Okay, so there's just the one multi-plug on the fan, goes over there on the side, and then there's a cable attached underneath. Normally I try to avoid dealing with those, but I'm going to go ahead and take this one off and get this fan completely out of here. Put it on the bench. I'm going to test it, put 12 volts to it, see if the thing even works. Let's see. Well, it spins, so that's promising. Usually if they won't work, they're frozen up. So let me get that linkage off, and then finally we'll be able to get back to that windshield wiper motor. So instead of taking the motor off the linkage underneath the cowl, I think I'm just going to drop the whole assembly. So what you have is a 22mm locking nut. Take that off. There's a beauty ring on top of a grommet, and these actually came out in one piece, which is amazing. Let's see if there's anything underneath holding it up in there. I'm hoping it's just the mechanism suspended from those stems. Sometimes you can pull the motor off, but the way they have the nuts, they're up inside of that suspending bracket, so that'd been a lot of work. Okay, let me poke around in here, see if I can get all this just to drop down. So yeah, I just had to give it a little wiggle, pry on it just a little. It popped out. There's some grommets on those stems on the back side. They were a little stuck. So I took a photo of the wiring on the back side of the motor and unplug everything, get everything through the bench, see what's going on. I might have gotten lucky here. So I took the motor off the bracket, the mount. And by the way, right now this whole assembly is upside down in relation to how it mounts in the car. You got a standoff that actually goes through the bulkhead. If I remember right, there's a 6mm nut under the dash. So it's going to be the same as this. It's like a stud probably. It broke off, but I don't know. It probably helped stabilize the unit or whatever. Got the motor off, put it on the bench, took the cap off the motor, which the internals look really good. The magnets didn't have any corrosion on them. The brushes were clean. The contact points were clean. However, the little transmission here, because it's got a transmission, it's got a shaft, and then there's a gear, a big gear. I've actually taken these apart before, and you probably don't want to do that except as a last resort. The drive shaft, for lack of a better description, was pretty bound up from corrosion, I believe. So basically, once I got this cap off, I kind of locked it in the vise, and then I took a pair of vice grips and just started turning this and turning the rotor on the motor, freeing it up, and just kept working it and putting PB Blaster on it, and it loosened up pretty good. And so now when I apply 12 volts, oops, whoa baby. God. So I think that's high speed, and that's low speed. And one of these would be for it to return the stop, like home base on the arms. Not sure what the other one does, a reference or whatever. But so now that we know the motor works, what I found on the linkage was it was super bound up, just like the motor. And I attribute most of it to these shafts, but I lubricated the hell out of everything, and then just started working it back and forth, trying to free it up. Still not, takes two hands really to do it, but this mechanism just goes back and forth, and this little arm here goes on the motor, and then it turns all the way around. So I'm going to lube it all up some more, put the motor on it, and hopefully it will work. Yeah, I'll take small miracles whenever I can get them. So all back together, lubed up, seems to be working pretty good. So next thing will be to take a look at the blower fan. If that thing works, I'll be batting 500. Well, at least on this project. So the fan started off a little troublesome and sticky. It seemed like the fan blades were rubbing on the case pretty bad. It's kind of odd how this motor is pretty exposed. However, you know, it's got a cover on it that fits around here. But I lubricated that bearing there. I tried, and of course I sprayed contact cleaner into the motor, the rotor, and the stator and all that stuff. And then also went around the edges trying to get a PB Blaster down, because there should be another bearing where that hump is. Now, I think you can pull this motor out by releasing these clips, but this plastic on this thing is so brittle. I'm gonna do the bare minimum. So looking at the connector that went onto here, I just took a guess, really. Didn't consult the wiring diagram, and I found that that works. That must be high speed. And my terminal just fell off. But what I did want to point out is that that current is passing through, I think those would be big resistors, or I don't know. I'd have to look it up in the parts manual. But I mean, I think you could probably go ahead and put 12 volts directly here, unless that's, well, it's got no grounding. It's a plastic housing, so that's got to be hot and that's got to be ground. Anyway, the point is, I wanted to put 12 volts where the connector does, and hopefully that's what I'm doing. And as you can see, it spins quite nicely now, most of the time. Sometimes you got to give it a little help. It's almost like it's cycling down for some reason. Maybe that has to do with those resistors. Not sure. But I'm going to say it's good to go. All right. I got it all back together. And in retrospect, dealing with the wiper motor and linkage, the only way to really do it is to pull the tank out. I should have done that from the beginning instead of messing around with those little clips and stuff. I cleaned up the air box and painted that little grill because it had overspray on it, red, looked kind of funky. So putting everything back together was pretty straightforward. The little drain tubes that connect to these corners on the airbox, this one over here, and they run back behind that bulkhead straight down. Those little nipples on the airbox were, there's not enough left to put the tube back on, so I said the hell with it. The rainwater will just collect in the box and drip down in the pan, and I doubt that this car is going to see much rain, not while I own it. Let's see what else was, putting the cable that actuates the flappers on the airbox was really sucked. You really need the box in place to connect that cable. Control cable is what it is. It goes to the panel inside of there. It opens up little louvers going into these tubes. And if you remember, I told you I was pretty hesitant to remove the clip. This is a clip that holds the cable in place. And putting that sucker back on underneath with the airbox in place, it wasn't going to happen. So I said, the hell with it. I just opened the louvers up and put the box back in. I was able to connect the cable, but I don't know how well that will work without having this anchor on the end of the cable. So bottom line, this car, hobby car, probably never be out in the winter time. In the summer, just take the target top off. The hell with it. What else? Putting the tank back in was fairly straightforward. I did repo the fuel pump back underneath there better, so I can put a cover over it eventually before I take it out on the road. Leave it open for now. I don't know how long that pump's going to last. It's pretty noisy. Just cleaned up, you know, this pan. Of course, that's another project to replace the pan in the trunk because it's been cut out for air conditioner. That was a dealer modification. So plenty of cars have had that done. And I just went through and neatened up and got rid of some wires that were floating around And of course the fuel pump wire that was run through the bulkhead here, that looked really bad. So rerouting, tidying up everything. I mean, having the tank out was good for all that, and cleaning all that junk out of the pan was really important, because moisture collects in there and that's a bad rust spot. So this little project is done. Next thing up, well, I just took delivery on a Weber kit. So we are going to be changing out their 32 ICTs, I believe. We're going to be changing out this old Holly, getting rid of those long runners and putting in proper dual carbs. And so that's pick it up. I'll start a new thread on that. That's going to be an interesting project. What I am going to do, because I had a little problem the other day, I lost my ground strap off of the transmission, and subsequently when I tried to restart the car, I cooked up some wires because the motor wasn't grounded. So that was the coil hot wire, the reference wire for the RPM, and what else? The wire that goes to the oil pressure switch. That whole little sub harness got really cooked up, so I had to basically open up that connector again, and I desoldered the pins and put those 3 wires back in the pins. Fortunately, I didn't burn anything else up. Everything in the harness going back up through the tunnel did not get fried. I guess the current just tried to find a weak link to make a ground. So I want to start the engine up in its current state with the Holly and see how it runs. Another thing that has happened is I've replaced some springs and collets on bank 1, which would be cylinders 1 and 2. We found out when we were doing a valve adjustment that one of those springs, the washer on the end of the spring was basically sprung, and that intake valve was not opening properly. So we averted disaster. I did not shoot a video on that. It was very tedious and time consuming and required all through 4 hands. Actually, it was just me doing the work. So, but I'm sure you can find information on replacing collets and valve springs because it's a common thing on other makes and models. So anyway, before I go and put all this Weber stuff on, I want to take a step back, confirm the engine runs as it did or a little better, because it's actually going to have all the intake valves opening now, hopefully. And then once I confirm that, and I'll shoot video of it, and then we can compare the difference after putting in the dual Webers. So hopefully it'll be a marked difference. Thanks for watching, guys. Look for the Weber conversion post soon.